I've always loved traveling alone. There's something peaceful about staying in new places, far from everything familiar. But one night, that peace turned into something far more sinister. It was late, and I was exhausted from driving all day. I checked into this old hotel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that feels stuck in time. The receptionist barely spoke, just handed me the key without a smile. Room 713. Strange, right? Hotels usually skip that number, but I was too tired to care. If only I had turned around that night. But I didn't. And what happened next still haunts me. Before I continue, if you're brave enough to hear the rest, make sure to subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to be alone for this. The rain had just started when I pulled into the hotel parking lot. The building looked old. Not the charming kind of old, but the kind that feels forgotten. Paint peeling off the walls, dim lights flickering in the windows. Still, it was the only place for miles, and I was too tired to keep driving. I walked into the lobby. It was strangely quiet. No music, no voices, just the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Behind the counter stood an elderly man, staring blankly at the register. He didn't greet me, just slid an old rusty key across the counter. Room 713, he mumbled. I paused. Isn't that unlucky or something? I joked, trying to lighten the mood. The man slowly looked up at me. His eyes were cold, distant. We don't believe in luck here. I forced a chuckle and grabbed the key. The hallway leading to my room was narrow and dark. The carpet was damp and the wallpaper was peeling in strips. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The room numbers went from 711 to 715. No 713 in sight. I double-checked the key. 713. Confused, I turned back to look down the hallway. That's when I saw it. A door at the very end of the hall, half hidden in the shadows. No number on it. The key fit perfectly. The room was ice cold. The air smelled stale, like something had been left to rot. I thought maybe it was just the age of the building, or maybe the cold draft sneaking in through the old windows. But now I know. It wasn't the cold air that made me shiver. Something was waiting for me in that room. I closed the door behind me, and the lock clicked louder than it should have. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner. The walls were yellowed with age, and the air felt heavy. I dropped my bag on the bed, but the mattress gave off a strange crunching sound, like something brittle was inside. I didn't think much of it at first. I was too tired. But then, I noticed something odd. The mirror on the wall, it was cracked. Not shattered, but a thin, jagged line ran through the center. I moved closer, staring at my reflection. But my reflection wasn't moving exactly as I was. It was subtle, barely noticeable. When I tilted my head, it was a second too slow. I blinked hard, told myself I was just exhausted. Then, there was a knock. Not on the door, but on the wall. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. I placed my hand on the wall, thinking maybe it was just the pipes. But it happened again. Knock, 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 louder this time, coming from the other side of the wall. I wanted to leave. I really did. But I told myself it was nothing. Maybe an old building just makes sounds like that. So I tried to settle in. I turned on the TV, but it only showed static. No channels, no sound. Then the room phone rang. I jumped. Slowly, I picked it up. Hello? No response. But then, I heard breathing, slow, heavy, right into the receiver. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. The silence that followed was louder than any noise. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the old man at the front desk was messing with me. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The carpet by the door was wet, as if someone had been standing there dripping, but the hallway was dry when I came in. And then, the shadow, under the door. Someone was standing there, not moving, just standing. I stared at the shadow under the door. It didn't move. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds, but it felt like forever. I slowly reached for the door's peephole, my hands shaking. But when I looked, there was nothing, just darkness, as if someone was standing too close for me to see their face. I stepped back, and then the doorknob slowly started to turn. Creaking metal sound. Not fast, not forceful, slow, deliberate. Like whoever was on the other side wanted me to hear every second of it. I grabbed the closest thing I could, a lamp, and held it tight. But the doorknob stopped. Silence. Then I nearly dropped the lamp. But when I looked down, the shadow was gone. I waited, listening. Nothing. I finally worked up the courage to check the hallway. I opened the door, slowly. Empty. But something was wrong. The hallway, it was longer than before. Much longer. It seemed to stretch endlessly with no end in sight. And all the doors, they were gone. Just walls. Cold, dark walls. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to face the room and froze. The bed, the sheets were pulled back, like someone had been lying there. But I hadn't touched the bed, and on the pillow, a single long black hair. I don't have black hair. The lights began to flicker. The air turned ice cold. And then, the mirror. My reflection. It was smiling, but I wasn't. The crack in the mirror began to spread, slowly, as if something was pushing from the other side. That's when I heard it. A voice right behind me. A low, raspy whisper. "Why did you come here?" I spun around, but no one was there. The room was empty, or so I thought, until the closet door started to open. I couldn't take it anymore. The closet door creaked open inch by inch, revealing only darkness. I didn't wait to see what was inside. I lunged for the door and yanked it open. But the hallway, it wasn't the same. The walls were decayed, the lights flickered violently, and a dark, wet trail led down the hall. I ran, but no matter how far I went, the hallway kept stretching. The exit sign flickered at the very end, barely visible, but every step I took, it felt farther away. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, matching mine. I didn't dare look back. I reached the stairwell and shoved the door open. The stairs spiraled endlessly downward, darker with each level. I bolted down, 2 steps at a time. But the numbers on the walls, B2, B3, B4, they didn't stop. I should have been outside by now. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping to call for help. But there was only one notification. Soft notification sound. A photo of me standing in the hallway. But it wasn't from my camera. It was from an unknown number, and under the photo, a message. "You can't leave." I froze. Then the lights on the stairwell cut out. Total darkness, but I could still hear it. Footsteps, getting closer. I turned and ran back up, slamming through the stairwell door. But I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was back in room 713, standing in front of the mirror, and this time, my reflection wasn't smiling. It was waving. I stood frozen, staring at the mirror. My reflection, it wasn't copying me anymore. It smiled. And slowly, it placed a hand on the glass. Then, cracks began to spread, like something was trying to break through. I backed away, heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. It opened. The hallway was back to normal. No endless walls, no shadows. Without thinking, I ran, down the hall, past the front desk. But the lobby was empty. No receptionist, no guests, just silence. I burst through the front doors into the freezing night air. The hotel behind me looked darker, emptier than before. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. But when I looked back, the hotel sign was gone, the building, was nothing but an abandoned, burned-out shell, like it had been empty for years. But that can't be. I was just inside. I still don't understand what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I get a text. No number, no name. Just a photo of room 713, waiting for me to come back. I never thought staying in a hotel room could be this terrifying. It was supposed to be a simple stopover on my way to the next city, a brief rest before continuing my journey. But as soon as I stepped into that room, something felt off. It wasn't just the dim lighting or the smell of stale air. It was the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, the natural result of being in a new place alone. But as the hours passed, the unease grew stronger. The silence of the room was oppressive, and even though I was alone, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't the only one there. I never imagined that this would turn into a night I'd never forget. I arrived at the hotel just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The building looked old, its paint peeling, windows clouded with dust. Still, I told myself it was just for one night. Inside, the lobby was strangely quiet. The air felt heavy, and the dim yellow lights flickered overhead. Behind the front desk sat an elderly man who barely looked up when I approached. His skin was pale, and his eyes seemed distant, almost lifeless. "Room 304, he mumbled, sliding the key across the counter without making eye contact. I hesitated for a moment. "Is the hotel busy tonight?" I asked, trying to make small talk. He paused, then slowly looked up at me. "You're the only guest." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I laughed awkwardly, hoping he was joking, but his expression didn't change. As I turned to head toward the elevator, I could feel his eyes on me. The hallway was dimly lit, and my footsteps echoed unnaturally. I told myself it was just an old building, nothing more. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but it was set to a normal temperature. Still, the air felt unnaturally heavy, almost as if it were pressing down on me. I tried to settle in, unpacked a few things, and turned on the TV for some background noise. But the static flickered for a moment before the screen went completely black. No sound, no picture, just silence. Then, I heard it. A faint tapping sound. Soft, rhythmic. It was coming from the wall behind the bed. At first, I thought it might be the plumbing or maybe the wind, but the taps were too steady, too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my ear against the wall, holding my breath. Nothing. But as soon as I pulled away, it started again. This time, louder. I quickly checked the hallway, but it was empty. The air out there was even colder. I locked the door and tried to shake it off. Minutes later, I noticed something even stranger. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it. Slowly, I approached and pushed the door open. The mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. But the room was freezing. And then in the center of the mirror, 4 long, thin streaks dragged down the glass as if something had slowly clawed its way down. I didn't remember breathing, but my chest felt tight. Something was in this room. I wasn't alone. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the long claw marks sliding down the fogged glass. My mind raced for a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I hadn't showered, the room was icy, and I was completely alone, or so I thought. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. So soft, it was almost like the wind slipping through a crack in the wall. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice. "Get out." My blood ran cold. I spun around, but the room was empty. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. The tapping sound returned, only this time it was coming from inside the room. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the closet. Slowly I approached the door, every instinct in my body screaming to leave it alone. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I hesitated, holding my breath, and then, bang! The closet door rattled violently as if something inside was trying to break free. I stumbled backward, heart pounding in my chest. Then everything went silent. The door creaked open on its own. In the dim light, I could just barely make out a figure standing inside. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its head slightly tilted as if studying me. Its face. There was no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched where eyes and a mouth should be. It didn't move. It just stood there watching me, or whatever it did without eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Then, it slowly raised a hand and pointed directly at me. That was enough. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock, feeling the air grow heavier behind me. Something was in that room with me, and it didn't want me to leave. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock, twisting and pulling at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the metal had fused shut. I yanked harder, panic rising in my throat. Click. The lights flickered again, casting the room into a momentary darkness. When they blinked back on, the closet door was wide open, empty. But I knew it wasn't gone. The air felt heavier now, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. I turned toward the window, thinking I could escape that way. But when I pulled back the curtains, all I saw was a brick wall, solid and unbroken. That didn't make sense. My room was on the 3rd floor, facing the parking lot. My breath quickened. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was black. Dead. Even though I had charged it earlier. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, dragging along the carpet. Coming closer. I spun around, pressing my back against the door. The room felt impossibly dark, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Whispers filled the air, low and unintelligible, circling me like a cold wind. I lunged for the door again, pounding on it with both fists. Help! Somebody, please! No answer. Then, the whispers stopped. Silence. I turned slowly and saw it, standing in the corner of the room. Closer now. Its head tilted, limbs impossibly long, its hand slowly reaching toward me. The walls around me seemed to breathe, the door behind me ice cold. No matter how hard I pulled or pushed, it wouldn't open. I was trapped, and it was getting closer. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The figure stood motionless, its faceless head tilted, as if studying my every move. The air grew colder, each breath forming a thin mist in front of me. I had to get out. Now, without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it at the creature. The lamp shattered against the wall, but the figure didn't flinch. It just stood there, silent, unmoving. Desperation took over. I turned and charged at the door, slamming my shoulder against it with everything I had. Crack. The door didn't open, but I felt it loosen slightly. I threw myself at it again and again, ignoring the pain shooting through my arm. Bang! On the 3rd try, the lock snapped and the door flew open. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. But the hallway wasn't how I remembered it. The walls seemed narrower, the lights dimmer. The air was thick, almost suffocating. Behind me, I heard it. Slow, dragging footsteps. It was following me. I sprinted down the corridor, my footsteps echoing unnaturally. Doors on either side of me blurred as I ran, but none of them had numbers. Just endless, identical doors. I reached the elevator and slammed the button repeatedly. The light flickered, but the doors didn't open. Closer. Without waiting, I turned and bolted for the stairwell. I threw the door open and began racing down the stairs, skipping steps, nearly tripping over myself. The footsteps echoed behind me, steady and slow, as if it knew I couldn't escape. Down, 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 yet the floors never seemed to end. Finally, I burst through a door, expecting the lobby, but instead found myself back in the same hallway, the same endless doors, the same flickering lights. No, 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 I screamed. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A glowing red exit sign at the far end. Without hesitation, I sprinted toward it, ignoring the whispers rising behind me. I slammed through the exit door and collapsed outside onto the cold pavement. I gasped for air, looking around. The hotel loomed behind me, dark and silent, but the windows, every single one was pitch black, except for one, room 304. A figure stood in the window watching me, and then it slowly stepped back into the shadows. I didn't stop running until the hotel was far behind me. I don't remember how far I ran or how long it took before I finally stopped. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I didn't dare look back. Eventually, I found a small diner off the highway, its bright lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The people inside stared as I stumbled in, sweat-drenched, trembling, and barely able to speak. One of the waitresses cautiously approached me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words felt hollow. Would anyone even believe me? After catching my breath, I asked about the hotel. Her expression darkened. "That place?" she whispered. "It's been abandoned for years. No one goes near it." I felt my stomach drop. "That's impossible," I muttered. "I was just there. Room 304. Her face turned pale. "They sealed that room off after a guest. Well, after they never checked out." I couldn't speak. My mind spun, replaying every second of what I'd just been through. I left the diner that night and never looked back. I didn't tell anyone else. What could I say? But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see that figure standing in the window, watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that faint whisper again. Get out. I never stay in hotels anymore. And if you ever find yourself standing in front of an old, empty hotel on a lonely road, don't go inside.